Well, turning to France, has President Macron done enough now to tamp down the anger there? Want to talk about more overseas, what I'm calling it the European paradox, right? Politicians, if you keep giving away free things, how are you ever going to spur economic activity? Joining me now to discuss Weekly Standard Deputy Managing Editor Kelly Jane Torrance and American Action Forum President Douglas Holtz-Eakin. Douglas, let me start with you first. I call it the paradox of Europe. You've got welfare states that want to sort of trigger economic ambitions. Well, if you're paying me to sit on the sofa and chill out, I'm never really going to hit the bricks, really.
Yeah, I think there's been a long-standing concern about the level of entitlement programs in Europe, about the high regulatory burden, the fact that if you look at the distribution of firms in Europe, you don't see young, vibrant startup firms. You see the larger incumbents squeezing out competition. None of that's a recipe for rapid economic growth, and we're just going to see more of the same.
You know, Kelly Jane, of course, there was some hope that Macron would be that person who could sort of bridge the gap. You know, he had business experience, investment banking experience. He understood that wealth tax was a killer. He's sticking by it, by the way, but the things that he's adding on will make things worse, because now their debt to GDP, if they go along with the plan that he promised last night, will be 3.5%, well above the EU threshold of 2.4%.
Yeah, this is really a fascinating environment, isn't it, Charles? And I'm glad you're talking about it. Yeah, you know, everyone thought Macron was the guy to do something in France. He actually was the finance minister for a socialist government, but he's got that business experience. And even last night, when he was talking about his plan, he said, we can't just tax the wealthy to solve this problem. We need jobs. We need growth. Well, like, look what's happening. That money has to come from somewhere. And yes, it's interesting because right now the EU is actually pursuing a case against Italy because they have gone over the 3% GDP deficit threshold that the EU demands there in Italy with their new fairly populist government. Now, if they go after Italy and not France, people are all across Europe are going to cry foul. So they're going to have to cut social services. And what's going to happen with the Gilets jaunes when that happens? They are, you know, the protests have died down a bit since Macron has promised basically $10 billion in concessions, including more money for minimum wage earners. But, you know, that money has to come from somewhere. And, you know, at first these protests almost looked like a Tea Party protest, right? Because you had people protesting a higher fuel tax, protesting, you know, higher taxes. But these people are not going to be satisfied with just, okay, we're going to get rid of that, but we're going to cut elsewhere. I think they're going to be upset by that, too. And if France doesn't figure it out, it's going to be on fire again. Well,
you know, and of course, the Tea Partiers are always cleaned up after themselves.
Exactly.
Douglas, it's not just France, though, right? It's a European problem.
Right.
And it's something that's coming to a head. And you know, listen, and you couple this with how old these economies are, these countries. Significant parts of their populations well over 65 years old. You couple them with years and years of socialistic tendencies. How do you do this? How can they ever possibly find themselves in a position where they're going to actually be able to grow these economies?
Well, I'll tell you, Charles, it's a very interesting moment. I mean, I'm old enough to remember the fall of the Soviet Union. That was a competition of models, capitalism versus the Soviet republics, and capitalism won. It showed that the route to prosperity was to rely on private markets and the entrepreneurial ambitions of the population. We now get another learning opportunity. We can look at Europe, which so many people in the United States claim that's what they want, and say, hey, is that really the model for what we want our future to be? And they could also look to the U.S. and hopefully, we will provide them with an example of reining in an entitlement state that costs too much, keeping taxes and the regulatory burden low, and reigniting growth. That's the opportunity right now.
All right, a learning moment. Thank you both very much, Doug and Kelly Jane. Appreciate it.